And they will also have people from, so there's a housing program as well, a Housing First program. So basically it serves a lot of very severely addicted people, a lot of Aboriginal people. And they were very severely affected by the flood. They had evacuation, they had severe damage. The Double Trouble and Recovery meetings that we facilitate in there, we're still at present not able to do that because the physical accessibility is a bit limited. The detox program was down, and they initially were evacuated to the Village Square Leisure Center, then twice more, and finally they're at the planetarium. But because the planetarium does not have a kitchen, what happens is that they can only have sandwiches. So they have been for weeks under these kinds of conditions. And our organization presented 50 dignity kits to them, and that's what we're calling them, but they are the hygiene supplies. They had put out a call for hygiene supplies, and so we assembled some that were sufficient, like proper for addiction treatment centers, because you can't put hand sanitizer in, you can't put mouthwash in, that sort of thing, and so one has to be, proper with what's given. And so it took us, even as an organization, because we run on very limited funding, and because of that, it took us even time, because there were items I had to round out from personal funds, so I had to wait till payday in order to be able to do that. So Alberta Network for Mental Health, we also want to congratulate Dr. Michael True for his appointment. He was, when I used to work, I used to nurse, and all my experience was in mental health, and he's a respected colleague, and I think it's wonderful that he has had this appointment. Basically, there is a meeting of mental health agencies that's meeting weekly with Dr. True, and they're trying to get a regular component for service provision and for people with ongoing issues. And they're trying to get a response for people that are, affected by the flood. So basically, it's interesting that I also am a coordinator for the Irricana Emergency Management Agency, and there was the possibility of a mutual aid request for some of our equipment, but in the end that was not needed. So that was the entire extent, and our EMA hasn't even met over the summer. Basically, the Calgary Police Service has a committee member that sits on the Action Committee for Disabilities and Abuse, and they felt that it was, of course, in any emergency like this, they said it was organized chaos, but that it was organized, and that they thought that they had phenomenal citizen response during the flood. And basically, the United Way was observing that there is some donor fatigue going on, so we expect that there will be some longer term effects on the NGOs as this process moves on. The Multiple Sclerosis Society, they were working with Alberta Health Services, looking at issues for accessibility and looking at the long-term effects. Basic care was met mostly by first responders and neighbors, but basically, it's important that we move forward in this recovery phase in a collaborative way, and I really hope that efforts of government are bent on that, are bent on making sure that in the recovery phase that people work together and find solutions, and not engage in what the Australians like to call a blame story. Because disaster by its very nature is an event that overwhelms all the usual coping resources. And this is the worst flood in 130 years. So by its very nature, all of us will be overwhelmed. And we have to start at that point and then go through one piece at a time. And we also notice that there's a real lack of information with respect to people with disabilities, mental health as well, but for how they're coping through the flood. We're not hearing a lot from the addiction community at this point. My only lead into that has been through Alpha House. And the other is just a lot of NGOs were wanting to know what they could do to help. And a lot of times there wasn't, I think, as effective a mobilization as we could have otherwise seen. And that goes to mitigation, and it also goes to the other phases of the disaster response. So there are 4 phases to the disaster response. There's mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Mitigation are the kinds of things that help lessen the effects of the disaster by being preventive. So managing the waterways would be part of that. Ensuring that every one of us, and I gotta show of hands here, how many of you have your 72-hour disaster kit? Your disaster preparedness kit. So that's one of the things that is very important. And it's, you know what, we get the same kind of show of hands even among first responders. So when we take our trainings in our emergency management agency, the first questions the instructors ask us is how many people have an emergency management, like a preparedness kit, their 72-hour kit. So that's one of the things too that's really important. And of course, when I was trying to phone some of the people that use our services regularly, you know, we had people who couldn't. You know, they were like, well, I can't afford, you know, to get a kit. And I'm like, look, at this point, please just get water. Get some pots and pans and put water in. That's your most basic thing. And if you're looking to start to prepare, start with water. But that's part of the process. But in not having, you know, effective means for disability-serving organizations to be able to mobilize and respond on the ground, that is one of the things that is really difficult, is that there's sometimes the people that we turn to first. Because our office is in Airdrie, we actually don't have, you know, physical proximity to the location. But what we were also noticing is that mentally ill people who are always forgotten, right, always last. Of course, when everybody started to need resources, our people were falling behind. So we were successful in getting ministerial intervention for one person who was on AISH after 2 years. And we wrote and said, you know, thank you very much. Please help this person. And the government responded immediately. So that was very helpful. And the other thing that did happen from a gendered lens on this is that there were 2 deaths during the flood, or 3, I think there were 3. Yeah, and two of those deaths, 2 of the 3 were disabled women. One of them was an 88-year-old woman who refused to leave her home, and ironically, in part, because she had a pet, and from what I understand, the pet lived, though she perished. And the other, of course, was the woman with cerebral palsy who died in High River, and she was you know, trying to save her friend. And so we don't know what the outcome was, if the friend lived or, you know, like what the outcome was. I'm assuming she lived, as she wasn't announced amongst any of the people who died. So that's another reason why I'm so committed to disaster recovery, and I'm hoping that I can inspire people in this room to also learn about disaster management and to really work towards effective change, because it takes everybody. And so preparedness is your second phase, and that's when you have your 72-hour kit. When people have emergency plans, if you volunteer for your emergency management agencies. And even one of the other things that you can do so you understand about disasters, if you go over to the Alberta Emergency Management website, they actually have a lot of free trainings that you can take. And so one of the things that you can do is take basic emergency management, which kind of helps you understand a little bit about the process. The other thing is that if you are working where you could potentially be, you know, in a position of response, at the disaster management forums that they have each year, they recommend that people take incident command systems and that they be qualified to at least a 200 level. So those are some things that can be done as well. Response, of course, is the acute response phase, and of course, mental health and medical people are mobilized when the response, all the first responders, police, EMS, and any volunteers. So all those people are affected as well in their mental health during and after the emergency. And then, of course, we have recovery. And in the recovery phase, I think the biggest challenges that we're seeing so far is some of the NGOs, such as Alpha House, that were very severely affected. What happens to detox beds that were lost through that, especially when we know that there's going to be a spike in mental health issues and a spike in domestic violence, because that happens post-disaster. If you read anything after Katrina, one of the things that also happens post-disaster is when the people are put in those temporary communities, sometimes domestic violence and intimate partner violence is a very prominent issue. And so that's one of the things that post-recovery people will have to look at. And in addition, we should also be looking at, when you look at donor fatigue, there's a local newsletter in Airdrie that was put out, and the message in it was from somebody whose heart was probably in the right place, but was somehow going through some very angry phase, and it was very stigmatizing for recipients, right? And so those are some of the things that we're also seeing. And as I said, the United Way is also starting to notice some donor fatigue. So with that, I will conclude, and I hope to hear lots of dialogue